Welcome to ACC Nation. That's Will Ojanen. I'm Jim Quist, and there's about a month or so to go before men's basketball really starts hitting the conference schedule hot and heavy. Did you know that 3 of the major name bracketologists were ranked 142, 102, and 98th in 2023 by the Bracket Project? That's at bracketmatrix.com in case you're interested in taking a look. And that's a result of looking at a 5-year run. Well, our special guest happens to rank 16th. And that's something that, he ought to be out there honking his horn about. All we can say is we know our sources and they're dependable. It's time to look at men's basketball in the latest 2024 NCAA tournament bracketology with Jason Carmello of bigunderdog.com. That's big-underdog.com. Make sure you follow them. Jason, thank you for joining us and starting to get into the season here and talk about how things are starting to take shape.
Yeah, it's awesome to be with you guys again. It's off to a running start, right? A lot of upsets. And I think it seems like every year everybody wants to talk about kind of the craziness of the NCAA basketball, right? The top teams get upset every year, and we have to remind ourselves to not be the prisoner of the moment, and that this happens every year, right? Dominance is so rare these days, and you can be really good and have 7 or 8 losses heading into the tournament in March.
I'll tell you what, let's get into a couple of things. We'll talk about the ACC a little more in depth here, but let's talk more about the NCAA as a whole, because what you just pointed out is that, when it's early in the season, you can't depend on anybody really having their stuff together completely. There's some teams that are lucky enough to be able to do that. But let's talk right now about how things are starting to shape up. And one of the things that you had brought up with us is which teams throughout the country have started out slow and that you're starting to buy into right now. And we were just talking about one of them, I think, offline here just a moment ago. So let's talk about the whole picture here of NCAA men's basketball first.
Sure. If you look at teams that are playing better than their records, I'd start with Michigan State. So they're likely, if they get beat by Wisconsin tonight and they're trailing, they're going to be 4-4. So Tom Izzo is going to start slow, which sometimes that happens with him, but his teams always improve, right? January, February, Izzo, April. So they always play well in March. The issue with Michigan State is last year they were 3rd in the nation. So just for everybody's reference, there's about 362 basketball teams in college basketball Division I. They were 3rd in the nation in 3-point shooting. They shot over 40%. This year, through 7 out 8 games, they're shooting under 26%. So they're 14% difference in the negative fashion with really the same roster. So the ball isn't going in. When the ball doesn't go in, as simple as it sounds, it's hard to win games if you're not making shots from the perimeter. They're going to start to go in. These players have a track record. Their guards are very experienced. And I found it really interesting. Tom Izzo was, I attended the Big Ten Media Day, and one of the things that Tom Izzo was, he was kind of glowing about his team, and he never does that unless he knows what he's got. So they've started slow, but I think they're going to pick up the pace, and by the end of conference play, they're going to be dangerous. They could have one of those years where they have 12 losses and they get that 7 or 8 seed, and then a 1 seed is going to have to turn around and deal with them in round 2. And Izzo's team will probably be, a favorite in the game, or they might be a 2-point underdog in the game because they've been playing that well late.
Lots of teams to talk about. Will, grab it, run it.
Yeah, I remember you'd mentioned you were at Big Ten Media Day, which was in my neck of the woods up here in Minneapolis. So I hope you enjoyed your time here.
It was great.
Yes. So let's start with your top line here, because I think this is a very fascinating top line here. Arizona, who is now number 1 in the rankings, obviously has that win over Duke. Purdue, obviously, they just suffered a loss to Northwestern, on the road. That's not going to really hurt them. Northwestern with Boo Boo East, still a really, really good team. Kansas, You can argue among the most talented teams in the nation with Hunter Dickinson, and then Houston, who, that, I mean, they just consistently have it rolling there. So let's tell me what your thoughts on that top line real quick.
Arizona's fascinating because they're led by Caleb Love, who, an ACC nation that is, that might result in some swear words by the listeners here from North Carolina. He did some really good things at times with Carolina. And I think he led to some frustration last year with Carolina fans because he just wasn't consistent and efficient enough to drive wins. But then, he comes back to Duke, Arizona, and credit to Duke for taking the game, and credit for Arizona to go on to Duke. They played early in the year, and Caleb Love, although he didn't score a ton, he made a bunch of free throws late and won at Coach K's court again. Arizona has all the parts and pieces. Again, they were a 2 seed last year. Princeton got him in the first round. So Arizona always has size. They needed some more dynamic players at guard, so they went out and bought Caleb Love and brought him in. Arizona has played the best in the country so far. They have the best wins, and they should be the top seed. Purdue is, to me, that's the storyline of the year. In the last 3 years, as a 1 seed, they lost to Fairleigh Dickinson, which is, in my opinion, the greatest upset in the history of college basketball. Fairleigh Dickinson was literally the smallest team by metrics in the tournament last year, and Purdue was the largest. It was incredible. So they lost as a 1-16 game last year. The year before, they were a 3 seed. They lost to a 15 seed St. Peter's, right? The year before, they were a 4 seed. They lost to North Texas. That was a 4-13 game. So they've lost to 16, 15, and 13 the last 3 years with really good rosters. And again, when we were up in Minnesota, you listen to Matt Painter and the confidence he has. And I will say this, of the coaches in the country that could lose as a 1 seed to a 16 seed for an NCAA tournament and win the national title the next year, well, Tony Bennett would absolutely be on the list. So that all checked out a couple of years ago. And Matt Painter's on the list too. There's only a few teams that could keep the roster together and not have people disperse and transfer, and to stay positive and to stay focused about it. And I think they can do it. They absolutely can. Obviously, Zach Edey's the headliner. He's the National Player of the Year last year. He'll be right up for it again. It's hard to win it back-to-back years because people get bored with their votes. But what Purdue really lacked last year, and we kind of talked to Painter offline a little bit, was he knew that their guards, and they were both freshman guards, and at times at the end of the year, they were really kind of worn down by the Big Ten. And they're excellent players and excellent scorers, but they're not great perimeter shooters. So teams really started to guard the paint, and they didn't shoot the ball well from the perimeter heading into the tournament. And then when the Fairleigh Dickinson game got close, they got really nervous, and that rim got really small. They added a shooter, just a flat out shooter, from Southern Illinois. His name is Lance Jones, and his job is to spread the court. So they've tried to just add a couple parts and pieces for perimeter shooting. But if you'd say right now, pick the team going to win it all, I'd pick Purdue. And I think Matt Painter deserves that. And hey, let's keep in mind, a few years ago, Jay Wright couldn't win a big game until he started winning a couple big games very late in his career. So I don't think we should give up on Matt Painter quite yet.
Specifically on the 2 line, I want to ask you about Gonzaga, because this is a very fascinating spot, because I feel like they don't quite have the talent this year that they have in years past. And right now their lone loss is to Purdue out of Maui. Okay, understandable loss. Purdue is really, really good. And their non-con schedule doesn't seem to be quite as strong as in years past. I mean, they just beat USC in a neutral, and they'll get another opportunity here coming up in about 10 days with UConn. So why do you have Gonzaga on the 2 line then?
I think their collection of wins so far and their lack of any losses that are kind of borderline just allow them to stay in there. And they've got, at this stage, you just have to evaluate so far what you've got. Yale is a solid mid-major team. They've got a win over Yale. Syracuse, as you know, right, in ACC country, Syracuse is, not the team they've been in the last 8 to 10 years or the last few years, but it's still kind of a name brand. Syracuse is okay. UCLA has been fantastic over the last few years. And then USC, I think the combination of the UCLA, USC, and how they've done it. I mean, they got USC by 13 the other night, and they were really outstanding. You, like you said, Will, the UConn game is going to be really big for their seeding down the road. In terms of challenges down the road for their seeding with Gonzaga, St. Mary's has really struggled. They've always leaned on St. Mary's to drive up some of that strength of schedule for them and to be the other team kind of running with them. The concern is St. Mary's doesn't have it, and St. Mary's is likely not going to make the tournament because they have really struggled in the non-con. The team that might have to help them is going to be Santa Clara, who beat Oregon in a preseason tournament as well. So I'm with you, but between the kind of the pedigree of what they have, UCLA, USC, that's probably enough right now to keep them in there. We'll see what they do against Washington and UConn.
I'm very fascinated by your three line because you got North Carolina. There's been, I think they've been better than expected. I mean, their lone loss is an overtime loss on a neutral to Villanova. Okay, understandable. Villanova on its good days can be a really, really good team. Just don't let them play one of the big five teams.
Yep.
And then a couple of the more early season surprises out of on the season is BYU sitting at 8-0 with a couple impressive wins, including San Diego State. Also, you have Colorado State, another team undefeated at 8-0. They also have a nice win. They beat Creighton on a neutral and have beaten Colorado at home. And then, obviously Florida Atlantic, we know they're running it back, have a really impressive win. They just took their second loss of the season tonight in a competitive game to Illinois, but they also have that loss to Bryant, which is going to be one of the more head scratching losses. So just overall your thoughts on that three line and where these teams can go. Cause I think there's a lot of potential for these teams, I guess you could say.
Absolutely. I think the team that has surprised the most is Colorado State for anybody in the country. They have a guard. His name's Isaiah Stevens. And if you told me to vote right now for the best player of the year, the player of the year in college basketball, it's him. He's been wonderful, and he is the epitome of college basketball. He's a 5-year player, and he has improved every single year. So he's someone that had tried to be poached the last couple of years. He stayed with his team, he stayed with his university, and it's paying through now. They came to Kansas City here, and they ran Creighton out of the gym, and it was pretty unbelievable to watch. They can really score, they can really shoot. They're not overly sized. So that's the concern. So far, they've shot the ball really, really well. But for now, Colorado State has been a great story, and their guards are excellent. BYU is another one that if you start to look at early season efficiencies, they're in the top 15 in both offense and defense. And there's a lot of data that still has to come in, and we're a long way away. But the reality is this: they have length. They always have size. They have length and size, and they guard the perimeter. And so, teams are shooting under 23% this year outside from 3-point range against them because they extend that defense, and they're really hard to score by. So BYU uses its length, Colorado State, its guard play, and they've both been really big surprises. Now, keep in mind, BYU is in the Big 12. So it's about to get real really quickly for them. So we'll find out what they have, but they build enough kind of stock early in the season that if they can just hang around 500 in the Big 12, they'll get in the tournament.
One more for before I hand it off to Jim is looking at your four line. Obviously, me, being a Virginia fan, I want to ask you about them. And I'm very interested because I've seen a lot of other bracketologists, the ones that Jim mentioned earlier that are ranked in the triple digits, that have them like way down. Like I've seen 8 seed, 9 seed in there. Yeah, you have them on the 4 line. What do you like about Virginia right now?
Well, they always guard. They play hard, they always guard, and they always have a chance to win. Listen, they played a neutral court game against Wisconsin, and Wisconsin can do the same thing. They both can shut the water off, right? And they both can keep a team in the 40s or low 50s and really have a team struggle offensively for that night and drive them crazy. But if you start to look at the wins already that Virginia have, a neutral win against Florida, and we don't know yet what Florida has, but they're a top 40 team, so that's going to be the top 50 if that's a quad 1 win. So that's going to hold. So they got a win against Florida, West Virginia. We'll see Texas A&M, who is fantastic. They are fantastic and really athletic, in Syracuse. So they're starting to build some parts and pieces to it. And the reality is, when you look around that 4 or 5 line, there's some teams that got upset like Villanova over the weekend, and you look around, and if your only loss is to a really good Wisconsin team on a neutral court, I think that's okay. That's okay for right now, especially with a lot of the metrics looking pretty good so far.
Interesting. Six teams that you have in your bracket at this point, and as you pointed out just a few moments ago, that it's early. So you're just beginning to collect data that actually makes some sense and that can hold up. So six teams out of the ACC. We'll talk more about each one of them. Virginia, I want to stick with them for just a moment because I was looking at their Kim Pom ratings, and this is not unusual, but I want to see what your reaction is to this aspect. They're number 6 in defense.
Yep.
85 on offense, though. I mean, that always, I think, throws people for a loop. So I want to hear it from somebody who does a bracket, what that 85 on offense means to you.
I think a lot of times you've got to you see that number, and let's start there. When you look at offense and defensive efficiencies in Ken Pom, and they're wonderful stats, and we all check them out. The key number when you're looking for any team is look at 50. Is there offense or defense below that 50 threshold? Because the reality is this: only 6 teams out of the last 88, only 6 of the last 88 Final Four teams have had an offense or defensive efficiency over 50. Miami was one of those last year with a defense that was about 101 when the NCAA tournament started. So it can happen, but it's very rare. You've got to get both your efficiencies 50 or lower. With that said, some of the, for example, with Virginia right now, their offensive rebounding is 271. I mean, that's inexcusable for a team that plays that hard. So that means they're just not, and there's plenty of shots being missed to rebound. So they've got to hit the glass better. Their 3-point shooting is actually okay. They're shooting almost 39%. So that's going to hold. If that holds, they'll be okay. They've got to rebound the ball better. That's the big thing. And they're only shooting 69% from the free throw line. So that's 230. So a lot of it is they're not doing the easy things. They're not rebounding the glass. They're not shooting free throws. Bennett will correct some of those things. So I'm a little bit more optimistic about that number. They've got to try, like you said, you got to try to get it right around 50. And that's just the way it works, because at times in the tournament, to make a Final Four, to win 4 games, you've got to lean on both of those at certain times. Certain games, it's one, it can be the other. But a lot of these games, when you get to an Elite Eight and a regional final, you got to rely on both. And that's where you usually see things break. Again, I always reference a couple years ago when Purdue played St. Peter's. And, Purdue's defense 2 years ago, even though they were big and all those things, was still in the 80s. And one of them is going to break. And that's just how it works with the efficiencies over a long season.
Interesting to hear that and how you break that out and how you look at it. I think that's an important way for us who are on the outside to process it and to be able to understand it and follow that reasoning. Makes sense. In the ACC, there is a team that is kind of a surprise. I mean, Will has been on this team's side, I think, from the get-go. More or less saying that, hey, he thought that this was a team to keep an eye on. And apparently you do too. And that would be Clemson. Talk to us about Clemson.
Yeah, Will, go get your flowers, man. You deserve it.
The funny thing is I am not a Brad Brownell fan, but then I'll let you in, but there's just something about this team.
Yeah, absolutely. It was really interesting. We talked with Chris Holtman a little bit, back in October, and Ohio State played 2 teams in the preseason exhibition. They played Clemson in a secret scrimmage, and they played Dayton, who Dayton is picked to win the A-10. So a really good team as well. And Holtman kind of off to the side said he could not believe how good Clemson was. That Clemson was absolutely fantastic. When you look at some of Clemson's numbers throughout the years, the last 5 years, Clemson's offensive efficiency, like we just talked about, is around 100. So they just couldn't do anything with it. They couldn't get the ball in the basket. Right? They weren't able to score. They guarded. They stayed in games. We always see Clemson close in games with big teams. Right? We always see that. But they weren't able to consistently score. So what did they do? They took Syracuse's best shooter and they brought him on board. Joseph Girard, and he spaces the floor. So he changes the math for PJ Hall to have more space inside. And now PJ Hall, who right now would be ACC Player of the Year, is 21 points, 8 rebounds, and 3 assists a game because he has room to work in there. They're not able to pack the paint. Girard and some of their guards are playing better offensively, spreading the court, and they're finding success that they've had defensively, but they're finally scoring the ball.
So you've got Clemson and then Miami at number 6 in your latest bracket. Let's talk a little bit about Miami, and I have a feeling I can just sort of toss things into the air, and whatever I catch, explains Miami. Right now, that's the best I can do.
Yeah, Miami is, they're a fascinating team. They play 4 guards, right? And they're out there to space it out, shoot a bunch of threes, and kind of try on defense, right? If your efficiency on defense in a major school like this and a team that's very good, coached by a fantastic coach in Larinaga, is around 100, then you're either really, really small, which they are, and you're not giving kind of the max effort defensively because you're really focused on offense, which they do. I mean, they just try to beat you 85-80. They still have Pack, they still have Poplar, and the reality is this: when they shoot the ball from the perimeter well, and they did in the NCAA tournament last year, especially against Texas in the Elite Eight, then they're almost unstoppable because they have such good guard play. But then they also have games where when the 3 doesn't go in, they can't stop anybody. And especially against a team like Kentucky, ran them out of the gym because Kentucky forced that ball inside. They used their size and athleticism, and Miami just couldn't stop it. It'll be interesting to see this year if Larinaga tries to do some things differently throughout the year, maybe goes to some zones, some matchups, because you can't consistently defy the numbers with a defense that poor and keep making runs in the tournament. So they've got to be careful. And I think they're going to have to change some things defensively.
I'm going to skip over number 7 and let Will get into that. What intrigues me is at number 10 that you have the Hokies. And I started doing digging, and I'm looking at video and I'm looking at numbers, and I just thought, well, Jason's going to be on the show, so just ask him. Okay, what's up with Virginia Tech?
Well, you get into the, in 10 right now is, they're a bubble team, right? But I hate to say that because there's no bubble yet. But, that's a kind of a borderline team right now. And, if you look at it in teams that are struggling and, right on the cut line, they've got wins over Iowa State and Boise State, and they've played a schedule. So when in doubt early in the season, I'm going to give the benefit out to the people that have scheduled. You got some teams right now that have only played a bunch of home games, and that's why I've dinged Texas a little bit, and that's why they're not higher. The reality is TCU is not higher in my bracket because they haven't gone out and played anybody either. Virginia Tech has done it. Mike Young does a really good job every year. And let's be honest, Virginia Tech's always going to hang around a 10 line. So let's just set them there now, get settled in, and we're going to know that they're going to probably come back to finding its level somewhere around there soon. It'll be interesting to see. They're right now, they haven't been, great defensively, but they have a history of being much better defensively. We'll just have to see. They've got, some decent mid-majors coming. They have kind of a soft start there, but then they hit the ground running with Clemson, Miami, and Virginia all in early January. So we'll find out by mid-January if they're still on track to be around a 10 seed.
Will?
Yeah, so I'll hit Duke and then I want to go backwards a little bit, but it's just Duke that spot on the 7 line is probably, if people read this, is probably going to raise some eyebrows. But you look at it, they, especially coming off of that loss to Georgia Tech, a team that is, they had a good week last week, and as we were recording, are getting blown out by Georgia tonight. That's not going to look good for them. But why so low on Duke in your bracket?
Because they're only 2 games over 500, right? They're 5-3. It's interesting. We can put out a bracket and try to predict the future, but the way I try to evaluate it, this is what they are. This is what they are, and this is the data that we have. And while there's a touch of trying to predict where they might go, the reality is I like to evaluate on here is what you are at this moment. And then down the road, we'll evaluate at that time too. I think Duke's going to be fine. And I think they're going to end up with a much, much better seed down the road. So this isn't a predictive bracket by any means, but they're 5-3. They have 3 losses. And there's no harm in losing to Arizona. It was at home, but there's no harm in that. There's no harm in losing on the road to a really good Arkansas team with Musselman. But when you go to Georgia Tech, you need to win. Like if you want to be a top 2 or 3 seed in a bracket that's being released, you got to be more than 2 over 500, and you got to beat Georgia Tech. Filipowski's been really good. And he's a fantastic player. It was awesome that he came back for college basketball and Duke fans. So I'm glad he did. And their losses are only by 5 points, 4 points, and 4 points. So they're right there. But the reality is this, Roach needs to shoot more. We're talking about an experienced player who has the ability to be a second or third team All-American. He's shooting 46% from the 3-point line, and he shoots 3 times from the 3-point line in the whole game. He's got to take more volume. The reason why Duke isn't winning right now is really simple. Their best players don't shoot enough. It seems crazy, but that's the issue. There's way too many participation shots going on when you watch Duke. Filipowski and Roach need to shoot more. And if they do, their seed's going to get better because their best players need to do more damage.
I want to rewind or go backwards a little bit. We'll talk about a team I don't really talk about because they're the neighbors next door, but Wisconsin has, I think, been very surprising this season. We talked about it before we started. Now, they have the neutral over Virginia, and tonight they just went into East Lansing and beat Michigan State by 13.
Yep.
This feels like this is and I think the way they're winning is what surprises me about this Wisconsin team this year.
Really good point. Really good point, Will. The last couple of years, they've really struggled offensively. They've always guarded just like Virginia, right? It's that same model, but they've really struggled offensively. This year, it's early, but they're a top 15 offense. And like you said, in the last week, they've beaten Marquette and Michigan State, and you throw in a Virginia win, and that's looking pretty good. 2 early losses to Tennessee and Providence. There's really no harm in that. But they're really scoring the ball. And then what happens is in these games, when it stays close fairly late, they're shooting almost 80% at the line, so they just pull away. And so that's been their model. Get out to a nice early lead, be aggressive, rebound the ball really well. They're really good rebounding team in the country, and then get fouled as you're putting it back in, shoot 80%, and then win going away.
Kentucky on the 5 line, is that more of a case of the loss to UNC Wilmington dropping them a little bit?
Yes. Yeah. It's over the last 5 years, Kentucky's been over 100 in terms of 3-point shooting content. 3-point shooting. So they've really struggled from the perimeter. This year, they're shooting almost 42%. They're 6th in the country. So they are dangerous. Reed Shepherd has been an amazing find in a number 1 recruiting class with all this amazing talent. He's kind of, obviously he's a very good player. His dad played there, but he was kind of the overlooked player in the class. He's been fantastic. And he could be SEC freshman of the year. Kentucky's shooting the ball much better this year, which makes them dangerous. Their defense, which has kept him in games, right? In the last couple of years with Calipari, it's kept him in games, is a little bit less efficient this year. So they're playing kind of more of the style they used to, which to go outscore people, but they're not there yet. The record is 6-2. That's okay. Like you said, a loss to UNC Wilmington over the weekend at home, but they St. Joe's at home as well, took them to overtime. So it could easily be 5-3 with 2 kind of, not so good losses at home, but they're hanging in there. They played fantastic against Miami. I think they have a really high ceiling. They have a much higher ceiling than they've had the last 5 or 6 years in Kentucky. And that's saying something. I think, when you look at Kentucky down the road, they could easily slide in down the road of a 2 or 3 seed because their athleticism, they have a lot of really good freshmen who are going to improve under Calipari, and they're finally shooting the ball a lot better.
About JMU, they're one of the last undefeateds left. They're obviously opened the season with the overtime win at Michigan State. Obviously had that followed up with a win over Kent State, but outside of that, there's not a ton of substance to their schedule, even going into conference play, because the Sun Belt is a little bit down, although App State looks to be pretty good. Can Is JMU, could they be a contender for an at-large should they end up, losing it with just based on that Michigan State win?
I think so. JMU, James Madison, they're going to have to be the biggest Kent State fans ever. Also, going to beat Kent State right after, and that was in double overtime. They don't, like you said, there's not much substance there. There's not going to be a lot of wins anywhere that help them a whole lot. I will say this: being in the Sun Belt with Appalachian State was able to somehow talk Bruce Pearl in Auburn into visiting Appalachian State over the weekend, and give credit to Bruce Pearl. And then App got him. So that Appalachian State win. So stay with me now, right? App got Auburn, and now James Madison gets a chance to play Appalachian State twice. So that's going to help Appalachian State's numbers a ton, that Auburn win, which could end up being huge for James Madison as well. So long story short, yeah, I think they absolutely could in at large. When you go and you beat Michigan State on the road, they're going to need Michigan State to be better, and they will. But if you watch TJ, Bickerstaff, who's related to some of the coaches, right, over the years in the NBA, and Terrence Edwards, those are high major players playing in the Sun Belt. And just like we saw a few years ago with, A. Smith, playing at Oral Roberts, and, some of the players Oral Roberts had, when they were playing in the Summit League, when you have players out kicking the coverage of their conference, they're going to do damage. So James Madison absolutely can. If they go unscathed through the non-con, which they likely will, they can probably absorb a couple losses, one on the road to App State, and still make it. I think they're very much in the mix to do that. Yep.
App State, the giant,
right?
Yeah. You
no matter sport,
should know better than to play App State in anything.
Yep.
Coming for you, and they will find a way to win. I mainly because I used to live just off campus at JMU. I liked seeing them do well. So I was there when Lefty Drizel was coaching. Yeah. So that was fun watching him in his next step after Maryland, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. Talk to us about Cinderella teams across the board here. I'm sure there's a lot of them. You've kind of touched on one or two here and there. And I remember the last time that we talked with you, you had a couple of teams that sort of came out of the middle of nowhere. I know that Will threw in a couple too that he was keeping an eye on last year. And you guys were kind of in lockstep on that. So let's see if you're in lockstep again this year, and that if you and Will agree on some of these teams that are Cinderellas.
All right, let's see here, Will. I'm going to start with Princeton. And, Ivy League schools have a good track record of being really solid, really good offensively, and potentially doing damage in the NCAA tournament. And it was Princeton last year, like I said, earlier in the pod. They beat Arizona, and then they beat a really solid Missouri team to get to a Sweet 16 last year. They even lost some of their players, in the portal. They got poached a little bit, but they still have a lot of good perimeter players. They've already beaten Rutgers and, a decent Bucknell team, a decent Furman team. So they're starting to put together a nice non-con already. They're already 8-0. And similar to Wisconsin, right? They shoot 80% at the line. So if you kind of look at the metrics of them, they're up 6 to 8 points late in games, and then they end up winning by 12 to 14. They pull away late because they shoot 80% from three, and they absolutely are going to do it again. The Ivy League is a small league, right? And so you don't have the depth, and you don't have as many. It's a much more simplified bracket late in the year, so you don't have as many upsets. The best teams in the Ivy League typically get an NCAA tournament. That's part of why the Ivy League teams do so well in the NCAA tournament. Their best teams always make it. And because of that, Princeton's going to have a really good chance to do some damage. If they make it, down the road, they're not going to be at 15 though. They'll probably slot in that 12 to 14 range. So teams will be a little less surprised this year.
That's a good one. I love Princeton. I mean, for all the reasons you mentioned there, and I think when you look at a team like them, they could easily run the table for a while. When you look at what they have on their schedule still, I mean, I think they play St. Joe's coming up, and that's they St. Joe's on the 10th, who we obviously know they just beat Villanova recently, so it's not like they're going to be a pushover. And then they're going to get a challenge in Ivy League play from a team like Yale. but yeah, that's a really good one. Another one that kind of came to mind, just kind of scanning. I wonder if a team like Grand Canyon could be one. I know they've been on the up for a couple of years. The only thing that concerns me though is they don't shoot the three very well.
Yeah, Bryce Drew, right?
Mhm.
Former high major coach. Grand Canyon, they play in the Western Athletic Conference, and they've been the class of the conference over the last couple of years. Like you said, they don't shoot the ball that well, but they're a pretty good rebounding team, and that's been keeping them in the games. They've typically scheduled pretty well so far. Like you said, a really really soft schedule so far. It picks up a little bit. This week they've got San Diego State and Liberty, who are really two really pretty good teams. Those are going to be really important for them, because after that we get back and settle in the WAC, and there's not much there. So any chance of an at-large, they've got to sweep San Diego State and Liberty. I think they lost to South Carolina. That was another chance. I think they're going to struggle to get an at-large just based on their schedule. They didn't ghost play people, so they don't get the benefit of the doubt. There's no Michigan State in there, so they're going to have to win their conference tournament. But Bryce Drew, I could see them making a run, and then Bryce Drew ending up in another high major job in the next year or two.
What about Greensboro? Because I think that's another one that comes to mind on the same seed line. I mean, they have the win over Arkansas already. Their only loss is a 4-point loss at Vanderbilt. So I feel like this is the team that could also be a potential Cinderella.
Yeah, they don't turn the ball over. They've been really, really steady. They take care of the ball. They're not overly sized. They struggled with some of the athleticism of Vanderbilt, but like you said, a win over Arkansas is really good, and not a terrible Illinois Chicago team that they beat. They've got a chance late in December against Texas, and we'll see. So there may not be enough here. Maybe not. Maybe that Arkansas win will be enough. I think if they get Arkansas and somehow beat Texas, that's probably going to be enough if they've got a pretty good conference record. But yeah, absolutely. Teams that with experienced guard play that take care of the ball are pretty dangerous late in the season, and that's what UNCG has. It's been a big week for the UNCs. You got UNCW beating Kentucky. You've got UNCG, beating Arkansas. Some of these teams are really dangerous, and you're going to have that, right? Because let's be honest, the best players on these types of teams, these really good mid-major teams, they start for really, really good teams next year. That's how it works. And so if somehow they were missed, or they weren't quite found, they didn't find the right spot, and they stay on this, then they're proving to other people their value in the NIL, next year. Next year, they could be playing on that Arkansas team. So
Sounds good. Hey, a great rundown, a great look at early bracketology for NCAA men's basketball. Hope to get you back in January, February, and March.
let's do it.
Just overload you a little bit this year, Jason. Jason Carmello with big-underdog.com. Visit the site. That's big-underdog.com. We'll put a link up on our website, and that way you can get to it directly as well if you don't remember that, or simply just go into Google and type in Big Underdog. That will do the trick. That usually will take you right there. So thank you, Jason Carmello, our special guest, talking about the 2024 NCAA men's basketball bracketology. It's not 2024 yet, but hey, we're almost there.
We're projecting.
That's right. That's right. Sounds good. And thank you for your time. I appreciate it, Jason.
Thanks, Jason.
Thanks so much, Jim and Will. Take care, guys.